For today's show, I've identified 5 under-the-radar starting pitchers the New York Mets could target in free agency.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so last year, the New York Mets went into free agency, and they signed Luis Severino to a 1-year deal and Sean Manaea to a 2-year deal with an opt-out after the first year. Nobody could have expected what they would get out of those two pitchers. Luis Severino was coming off a year with the Yankees where he had, I think it was a 6.65 ERA, got knocked around a ton. Sean Manaea was pitching out of the bullpen for a majority of the year in 2023. They sign these guys, they give them starting jobs from, jump from opening day. That was pretty much the selling point. Hey, come here, be part of our rotation. We believe you can bounce back. And these two guys were the absolute bedrock of a rotation that nearly got to the World Series. And Sean Manaea actually got a Cy Young vote, a 5th place vote, which had him finish 11th in the Cy Young voting. But it is just a testament to the Mets' ability to find these guys, these diamonds in the rough, and turn them into really good starting pitchers. It's a credit to those two guys for the work they did, but also to the organization for identifying them. So I went through and I tried to find some under-the-radar starting pitchers the Mets may target. They might have some names that are completely out of left field that I'm not even seeing that they sign, and I trust this front office to identify those guys. But here are a couple of lefties we're going to open up with that I think make a lot of sense for the Mets to sign. And the first one we'll talk about is Andrew Heaney. Heaney is 33 years old. He's coming off 2 years with the Rangers where he's been just a very good back-end starting pitcher. 4.22 ERA across a 2-year contract, pitched 307 and a third innings. In this past season, he got up to 160 innings pitched to a 4.28 ERA. So he's been very solid, not going to blow you away, probably not anything more than a 5th starter, but a good one at that. Here's the thing that I like about Andrew Heaney, though. You go back to 2022, and there was a little bit more in the tank. This guy pitched to a 3.1 ERA with the Dodgers, struck out 110 in 72 and 2/3 innings pitched. That is an elite strikeout rate. How did he do it? What was different with the Dodgers than what he's done the last 2 years with the Rangers? The biggest thing that jumps out is he was pretty much a 2-pitch pitcher with the Dodgers. It was just fastball, slider, and then a changeup he threw 5% of the time. Now, for his career, he's more been a 3-pitch pitcher. Fastball, slider, changeup. Now, that changeup, I don't know if that's just the kryptonite. That's the thing that he needs to stay away from, because I understand wanting to have another pitch that you can throw to opposite-handed batters. So to righties, he wants that changeup, just like he's going to throw that slider a ton to lefties. But if the slider is your best pitch, maybe you need to lean into it more. And I think that's what the Dodgers tapped into. He had a whiff rate of 44.7% on his slider in 2022. Last year, it was still good, 36.5%. He also threw 6 pitches altogether last year. So it just shows a pitcher that maybe wasn't as zeroed in on his bread and butter. For the most part, it was still primarily fastball, slider, changeup, but he did throw a couple cutters, a curveball. He did throw some other pitches that he probably doesn't need to even mess with. So maybe that is something that Andrew Heaney needs to do. Maybe he needs to focus in on just fastball, slider. Regardless, what I like about Andrew Heaney is there is that hope of some upside that isn't that far back in the rearview mirror. You're just talking about, the 2022 season where he pitched to that level. But also you have a guy that's been durable the last couple of years. In this market, Andrew Heaney could get paid more than I'm comfortable with, and he could get more years. I wouldn't necessarily want to see the Mets sign Andrew Heaney to anything more than a 2-year deal. So if he's got a 3-year deal on the table, I wouldn't really go near him. But I do think that this is a quality starting pitcher that if you brought him in to be your 4th or 5th starter, he's going to give you a good enough floor with some ceiling to be a little bit better. Now, a more under the radar arm is a guy that thrived on the biggest stage down the stretch with the Cleveland Guardians. That's Matthew Boyd. Matthew Boyd got Tommy John surgery in 2022, and he's really finally starting to get back to being who he is. And he made 8 starts with the Guardians down the stretch. And I believe he was dealing with an elbow injury early in the year. So, still maybe some residuals from the Tommy John, I'm not sure. But in those 8 starts down the stretch, he pitched to a 2.72 ERA. He made 3 starts in the playoffs, allowed just 1 run in 11 and 2/3 innings pitched. He's also 33 years old. And if you look at what he has, it's a fastball that plays up in the zone, a good changeup that comes in at 81 miles per hour, the fastball 92. So some big separation there that he's able to change speeds with, and a really good slider as well at 80 miles per hour that got whiffs 45% of the time this past season. So he's able to really use that 3-pitch mix, and he found a lot of success down the stretch. So this is a guy that I think has a ton of upside because he was pitching really well against some good lineups in the playoffs, really showed the ability to go at a tough Yankees lineup with his best stuff and come out giving up just 1 run in 5 innings pitched. So I think Matthew Boyd is a guy that's probably going to get a lot of looks this year. It might be a bloated 1-year prove-it deal. I think the Mets should be in on that because Matthew Boyd could just be this guy that all of a sudden has a breakout. Very similar to what we just saw from Manaea, where all of a sudden he is just carving and pitching to a sub-3 ERA over a large sample. This was, again, only 11 starts altogether, 8 from the middle of August to the end of the year, and then 3 in the postseason. But Matthew Boyd did show himself to be a pitcher that can get outs and, turn over a lineup a couple times. So I think Matthew Boyd is, of all the names we're going to talk about today, I think he's the most intriguing from an upside perspective. The other guys that we're going through, I think the floor is pretty high. But for Boyd, you're looking at someone that I think might just have another gear that he started to scratch the surface of that he could really follow through on and be an absolute weapon for the Mets next year. And also a guy that isn't going to cost a ton in free agency. I think he's going to want to go to a really good opportunity, a place where he can start, from opening day on, be part of that opening day rotation. The Mets could guarantee him that with a contract, and you just see where it takes you. But I think Matthew Boyd is going to have a lot of teams fighting for his services, very similar to Manaea last year, where teams were looking at some of the underlying data on Manaea and thought, man, maybe this is a pitcher that could really hit another level. The Mets ended up getting the deal done probably by giving him that second year. And with Boyd, I don't know if I'd be entirely opposed to that. I really wouldn't, because it works so well with Manaea, and you might just have another guy in Boyd that could hit that type of a gear. I don't know if he could be as dominant as Manaea was, because Manaea is, a big guy who tapped into that Chris Sale arm slot. I don't know if Boyd can sustain that level, but could Matthew Boyd be a number 3 starter that you're handed the ball to in the postseason? I think that's a chance that he can. So I really like that potential signing. I got a couple right-handers we're going to talk about in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So you get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And remember, you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So make sure you got a bet that's a slam dunk, one that you know is going to hit. You throw $5 on it, and you're going to get that $150 in bonus bets if you win. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sports book. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 11,000 subscribers. We're nearly 100 away. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so we got a couple of righties to talk about here. The first one also finished the year with the Cleveland Guardians, and that's Alex Cobb. Alex Cobb had hip surgery at the end of 2023, so he did not pitch with the Giants at all, but got traded at the deadline. He had a blister that put him on the IL as well, only made 3 starts with the Guardians, pitched to a 2.76 ERA, had a torn fingernail that knocked him out in the playoffs after some bad starts. But if you look at who Alex Cobb had been prior to this season, 2022, he pitched to a 3.73 ERA in 28 starts with the Giants. 2023, he pitched to a 3.87 ERA in 28 starts with the Giants. He's 37 years old, so he's a little bit further along his career, but he's still throwing his sinker at 94 miles per hour. He's got a split finger at 89, knuckle curve. This guy has been a good quality big league starting pitcher for a long time. He's a ground ball pitcher. I talked about floor. To me, Alex Cobb has a very high floor. You obviously have to wonder about the injuries after this past season, but he was recovering from a hip surgery. We saw David Peterson really thrive coming off of one. So Alex Cobb, a little bit further along as far as in his career than David Peterson. Maybe took him a little bit while longer to bounce back coming off of it. But now, more than a full year removed from it, I think he'll have a healthy, normal offseason. The injuries at the absolute tail end of the season were just, typical pitcher, blister, fingernail injuries, nothing to be worried about going into next year. So with a normal offseason, I think Alex Cobb could get back to being the guy he's been. And that's a guy that can pitch 150 innings at a sub-4 ERA. That's a really good 4th or 5th starter. I really like Alex Cobb because of the floor. I don't know how high the ceiling is, but I think this is a pitcher that you sign. You expect him to go out, get ground balls, and just give you quality starts. So I think he is an underrated free agent for sure. Probably not someone you have to give much more than a 1-year deal. Maybe it's $10 million. Sign him up. Throw him into that rotation. I think you're going to get some quality production. A little bit more under the radar with some upside is Trevor Williams. Bring him home, right? He'll turn 33 next April. He's coming off a pretty darn good season, a 2.22 ERA across his first 11 starts. He was trending towards being an all-star for the Washington Nationals. He then had a right flexor strain that kept him out until the end of September. Returned, made 2 more good starts at the end of the year, 5 innings pitched each time, gave up just 1 run, and one of them shut out the other one. So he finishes the season with a 2.03 ERA in 13 starts and 66 and 2/3 innings pitched. Really wonder how teams are going to view him because that's a great season, but his last full season in a rotation in 2023, he pitched to a 5.55 ERA in 30 starts. You remember with the Mets, 3.21 ERA, mostly out of the bullpen in 89 and 2/3 innings pitched. He really thrived as a swingman. What is it that made Trevor Williams so successful this past year? It's a fastball that defies all logic because he averages 89 miles per hour on the pitch. And yet, that fastball had a run value of positive 14, which was ranked in the 93rd percentile in Major League Baseball. So Trevor Williams, with his 89 mile per hour fastball, was among the top 10% of pitchers, really the top 7% of pitchers in Major League Baseball with the results he got off of his fastball. The way run value is calculated, it is taking into account the outcome when you throw a pitch. So, for example, bases loaded, 2 outs, you get a big strikeout on the fastball. You are going to get positive run value added. Now you give up a grand slam, negative run value added because you just gave up 4 runs. So it really does look at outcome. It's not a predictive stat. And for whatever it's worth, whether it was just fastballs that were getting drilled right into national fielders' gloves Whatever it was, Trevor Williams' fastball was elite this past season. Batters hit just 196 against it. The real thing that unlocked him, though, was a new sweeper that he started to pick up in 2023, seemed to perfect it in 2024, had a whiff rate on that sweeper of 46%. That pitch is coming in at 77 miles per hour, and he has a changeup and a slider that are both in the low 80s. So how does he do it? He does it by location, and just mixing his looks, mixing his speeds. At 89 miles per hour, that fastball plays up a little bit when everything else has that big separation when it comes to velocity. So if you're gearing up for a fastball, gearing up sounds kind of funny, gearing up for an 89 mile per hour fastball, but then he drops the hook on you with a 77 mile per hour sweeper, all of a sudden you're out in front and you get those really bad looking swings coming off the front hip. If you're now trying to watch out for that sweeper, throws that fastball up in the zone, he can throw it right by you. So it is pretty interesting how he's able to really have a ton of success without the velocity, but it does come down to pinpoint location. If you look at the heat map of his pitches this past year, he was remarkably consistent. That sweeper was either dotted low and away or it was outside the zone trying to get chased. The changeup, same thing on the other corner. So if you got a righty up, he's throwing that sweeper. If you got a lefty up, he's throwing that changeup low and away, getting the swing and miss, getting some ground balls. Has a slider that he maps a little more in the middle of the zone, but low. So now you're expecting a sweeper, you're expecting more break, and he surprised you with a slider that doesn't have that same horizontal bite to it. And then the fastball, all of it was located up in the zone. So he really has figured out how to change eye levels, how to change speeds. If you're looking for a fastball up and then you get that sweeper down and away, by changing that eye level, he can really play with you. And it worked for him. He pitched to a low 2s ERA. I don't know if Trevor Williams would want to come back to the New York Mets because he might have that fear of, I don't want to be put back into a bullpen. But it's a completely different front office, and they could sort of give him the keys to start. I think the problem with Trevor Williams is the fact that he's still not as established, right? He's a year removed from a 5.55 ERA. What he did last year was electric, but it was very small sample size. It was 13 starts. So if you are the Mets front office and you're in conversations with him, what you don't want to do is say, hey, you're definitely going to start. And then you go into spring training and Tyler McGill looks better than Trevor Williams. And you want to put Tyler McGill in the rotation, but you've already made that promise that Trevor Williams is going to get that first crack at it. These are conversations that happen. That's how these deals come together. And you don't want to go back on your word to a free agent because then you get a bad look in the industry. So you really have to think about signing Trevor Williams. Do you believe that what he did last year was legit? And if you do, you are committing to him being a starting pitcher, I think, in your rotation, which is fine because I think there is some upside here. I don't know if he's going to be able to pitch to a low 2s all year long, but could he be a quality starting pitcher that pitches to a sub-4 ERA and gives you, 30 starts and 150 innings? I think that is in the cards based on the progression we saw from him this past season. What I always like about a pitcher like Trevor Williams is that control. I hate the guys that's just going to go out there and walk a ton of batters and put himself in harm's way. With Trevor Williams, if he's going bad, he's getting hit hard. And I prefer that compared to the pitcher that's walking the world and then that one, big home run kills him, or it's death by 1,000 cuts where you walk the bases loaded and all of a sudden, sack fly. No one really hit the ball hard, but you gave up 3 runs. So I think Trevor Williams is a really interesting guy to potentially bring back. Between him and Alex Cobb, I think I like Trevor Williams a little bit more just because he's younger and he did show a little bit more upside. But Alex Cobb is just, a veteran that I think you can go to the bank with as far as the floor of him being a guy that's going to eat innings for you and be a quality fifth starter, if nothing else. We got one more pitcher to discuss in the final segment, though. Under the radar across the league, maybe beloved to Mets fans after this year. Should they bring back Jose Quintana? We'll go through that to close out the show. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, I wanted to include Jose Quintana in this grouping of pitchers because I think it's a pretty similar free agent tier as far as what these guys are going to command on the market. Jose Quintana should make a little bit more than all of them, just considering the fact that he was healthy through 170 innings, but he's also a little bit further along in his career. How old is Quintana at this point? I did not mark that in my notes. Was he 37? He is, I'm aging him a little bit. He'll be 36 at the end of January. So going into his age 36 season, but you look at what he's done the last 3 years, he's been pretty consistent. The Mets signed him off of a 2022 season where he really, found something because he had some down years. 2022, he, turns back the clock, pitches to a 2.93 ERA across 32 starts, 165 and 2/3 innings pitched. The Mets add him after already picking up Justin Verlander and Kodai Senga, showed that commitment to win big in 2023, really wanted to fill out their rotation. And Jose Quintana's injury, I think a big reason for some of the Mets' early struggles. They just did not have the right depth behind him. When David Peterson struggled on top of Quintana being out, Tyler McGill struggled, the entire rotation kind of cratered. You look at what he did when he got back, though, 3.57 ERA in 13 starts. That leads him to be the opening day starter for the Mets in 2024. And while he had a lot of peaks and valleys, the peaks were really impressive and ultimately led to him having that 3.75 ERA and 170 in the third innings pitched. Luis Severino and Sean Manaea, they're going to go out in the market right now, and they're going to get some pretty big deals. I just did my free agent predictions article for Just Baseball. I predicted Sean Manaea to come back to the Mets on a 4-year, $76 million deal. So that's $19 million per season. And I think the Mets giving him a 4th year might put them over the top. I also think that there's a chance Sean Manaea might get a better offer in free agency, and maybe he'd choose to come back to the Mets for a little bit less. I could see him maybe getting an $80 million offer over a 4-year deal. Luis Severino, I projected 3 years, $51 million, which is basically the Michael Wacha contract he just signed with the Royals. I think $17 million per. Maybe he can get up to 3 years. I would think that the qualifying offer will dampen Luis Severino's market a lot more than Sean Manaea's. And you never know, that could lead Severino to come back to the Mets. But the point is, those two guys are going to get paid. They're going to get multi-year deals. That's why they declined the qualifying offer that would have paid them $21.05 million. With Jose Quintana, you can bring back a vital piece of your rotation and probably won't spend much more than he cost you the last couple of years. It was $13 million per 2-year, $26 million deal. I think right around that, you're probably getting him back on a 1-year deal. Maybe you didn't have to spend $13 million. Maybe it's $10 million because he's just a little bit older. But I think Jose Quintana is at a stage of his career where he wants to keep winning. And I don't know how many contenders are going to look at Jose Quintana and they're going to ignore the age and ignore the valleys, because there was times this year where it didn't look pretty. Then he locked it in down the stretch and was as good as any pitcher in baseball, quite literally. Remember, in September, he gave up just 2 earned runs over 25 innings pitched, and that streak of good pitching actually extended into August. Had 2 starts in August that were really good at the end as well. This all came after he gave up 7 runs on August 20th, and we were talking about how fans wanted him out of the rotation. He settled in. He had 6 great starts down the stretch, went into the playoffs, did not allow a run across his first 11 innings pitched in 2 starts that the Mets won. And then he eventually faced the buzzsaw that was the Dodgers, gave up some runs. But overall, Jose Quintana was brilliant this past season. And if you just had to ask me who I'd rather the Mets sign, Quintana or all the guys we went through today, if the cost was pretty similar, I think I'd like Quintana just because I know what I'm going to get. And it's a guy that's going to compete, a guy that's going to figure it out. I think he's really learned how to make adjustments. And He's just a really solid pitcher. Like, you compare him to Alex Cobb. I think they're very similar free agents. I really do. Quintana's coming off the better year. He's familiar with New York. I'd go Quintana. You compare him to Trevor Williams. Track record, Quintana, much better pitcher throughout his career. Trevor Williams, maybe some more upside, but we also saw floor just in 2023 of that 5.55 ERA that had me a little bit worried. Andrew Heaney, he was healthy all year. He did not put up as good of a season as Jose Quintana. And I think Andrew Heaney, because of his age, he might be able to get that 3-year deal on the market. Matthew Boyd is probably the one where if the contracts were identical, I'm going to take the upside play in Matthew Boyd over Jose Quintana. But overall, I think Quintana coming back to the Mets might make more sense than any of the starting pitchers that they had this year that are not free agents, only because there's that qualifying offer. And look, I want the Mets to bring Sean Manaea back. I do. But you have to think in the back of your mind, if he does sign elsewhere, you're going to get a comp pick. Now, it's a pick after the 4th round. Might not amount to anything, but it's at least something. And if the pricing gets crazy on Sean Manaea, you got the season of value. You already did. And now there's a team that's going to pay off of that great year he had. He might not be able to replicate that over a 4-year deal. You really don't know. I believe in Sean Manaea. I think the Mets should bring him back, but there's definitely some risk there. You look at Luis Severino. I think the Mets should let him walk at this point because you're going to get a comp pick, and I don't know how Sevy is going to bounce back after this year. Just threw a ton of innings. Is he going to be all of a sudden a ground ball pitcher that gives you 180 innings each year and pitches to a sub-4 ERA? It's possible. It's possible, but I'd rather another team make that investment potentially over a longer-term deal. Jose Quintana comes with pretty much no risk. You sign him to a 1-year deal, and if he's good again, great. And if he's not, hopefully a Brandon Sproat establishes himself, and maybe Quintana is pitching out of your bullpen. Or if it really falls off a cliff, maybe he's off the roster altogether. But there's no risk in bringing Jose Quintana back. There's some risk in bringing back a Manaea or a Severino. And there is that comp pick that you are not going to receive where you would if you let them sign elsewhere. Not that that is a deciding factor entirely, but it is something to keep in the back of your mind. Overall, the New York Mets, I think, have to do a little bit of both this year. They have to find an ace. They got to sign one of these top starting pitchers, whether that's Corbin Burnes, Blake Snell, Max Fried. My preference is probably Snell, but we'll talk about that on another podcast. And then you still have to, I think, identify some of these guys who are lower cost, lower risk, shorter term deals that you believe you can get the most out of, who can fill out your rotation, because I think the Mets would be wise to still add 3 starting pitchers. I think that would be the best course of action so that you're going into spring training and you have the Tyler McGill, Jose Butto, Paul Blackburn contingent that's all vying for a 6 starter spot, because you're probably going to need 6 starters with Kodai Senga in your rotation, and that would give you the depth to really fill things out and be prepared for the inevitable injuries that come, because we know every year you really need like 9 starting pitchers to get through a season and be okay. The Mets this past year were really fortunate to get all the innings they did out of their top 3 guys, Manaea, Severino, and Quintana. That might not happen next year. So depth is key. And the 5 guys that we identified throughout the show today, I think all present a good case to be quality mid to back of the rotation starters from the Mets next season. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's show. On tomorrow's show, barring any news, we're going to talk about the non-tender deadline, which is on Friday. Is there any players that are going to get cut? And also sort of speaking to the Mets roster, because it's a Friday Farm Report, I'm also going to talk about which top prospects will be added at some point during the season in 2025, who will be on the Mets roster by year's end. We'll go through it all on tomorrow's show. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Go follow me on social media at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first watch or your first listen every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.